Farthest Frontier, version 1.0, released on October 23rd, 2025. I purchased this in August of 2022, and I didn't play it until Crate decided it was time to release. Then I played it. This was essentially a gesture of faith in the developers, since I really did enjoy Grim Dawn quite a bit. And that being said, I'm not by any means an expert at these types of games, referring to real-time strategy or city-building type games. I'm not going to compare this to other games because they'll have their own pros and cons, so I'll just say I myself have played a fair bit of older Total War games, the newer Manor Lords project, City Skylines, SimCity, like dating back to the late 90s type of SimCity, going up to the most current flops that they had. Lots of real-time strategy, tower defense type games, and some farming games. So Farthest Frontier will have a little bit of elements from each of these. So I can basically say that these sorts of expectations are something that long-time video game enjoyers will have. So for some background context, I've put an inordinate amount of time and effort into Grim Dawn and played it to relative completion, which Steam reports is approximately 454 hours. I purchased Farthest Frontier when it was first announced in early access, and didn't play it till 1.0. I didn't even really keep an eye on what was happening with it. And as far as I know, Grim Dawn and Farthest Frontier Crate's only published games. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that. So last time I played Grim Dawn was several years ago. I couldn't hold a conversation about it today, to be honest. I could just say it was a really, really good game. Maybe just hovering over this stuff will give you an idea of how much I played, at least during the Ashes of Malmuth expansion. I guess I was in the 1% of people who actually got the Unstoppable Lord of Crucible achievement, so that just sounds cool in itself. Anyway, I liked Grim Dawn a lot. That's basically the whole point here. So I knew that I'd like to support any further endeavors these developers would be going on, but that's not exactly what this video is about. Farthest Frontier took me a little while to understand, but I think I've gotten a rather clear grasp of what it presents as a product, and it's inspired me enough to want to write a thorough review on it. So now I started writing, and it ends up I hit the character limit on Steam reviews, so it just seems appropriate to make a video about this. I'm just going to break this down to sections so I don't overlap my thoughts too much. It seems as if there are a few ways to approach this game, and it doesn't outright tell you, beside a few tutorial pop-ups, what aspects are important to focus on. To me, this creates an environment that's open to interpretation despite being hard-locked into some mechanical systems. It initially presents itself with a sandbox feeling and through trial and error, while establishing a clear guiding principle of what city growth and progression means to the player. This approach is a double-edged sword depending on who's playing. For example, in the game Guild Wars 2, despite being an MMORPG with a rather linear storytelling progression, it gives you a lot of options. This either creates an environment of total freedom for the player, or it weighs too heavily without guidance. I have a feeling that the evolving player base will be similar over time. You'll likely have some die-hard fans of this game for years to come, and a lot of confused tourists along the way. As of 2025, September 23rd, this theme may be either off-putting or extremely welcoming to new players, and that's something you'll have to personally decide. Ultimately, what this boils down to is you'll need to create your own goals. So, for people who want a direct and concrete goal while they're playing their video game, they'll have to take an extra step to decide, well, what is the end game for me? The most immediate and easy to follow goal is looking at your buildings and attempting to build all of them. This establishes a path in which the player can witness all of the game's systems working together at once. When you're creating a map, the game clearly states that some materials may or may not be available on your map. So on my last attempt, I decided to re-roll my map until I saw all available materials available in some capacity. This allowed me to utilize every building in a rather consistent way. The gameplay loop is slow, and I mean that in a good way. Progression is limited to passing time in the game world, which can be controlled by 1/2, 1x, 2x, and 3x speed respectively. According to the wiki, this means on 1x speed, which would be normal, that comes out to about 30 minutes per year. So 2x would be 15 minutes per year, 3x is 10 minutes per year. My last playthrough resulted in reaching over year 120 before writing this review. Perhaps I've glossed over some detail or neglected to read flavor text, but during this playthrough I discovered what a victory was. And this can be found on the game guide section of the Farthest Frontier website, which reads, "Constructing one of the monuments triggers Farthest Frontier's flexible victory conditions, an acknowledgement of how far your efforts have come. The journey does not need to end there, though, as you can continue playing the save for as long as you wish." So after constructing one of these 3 monuments, I was met with a victory splash screen, which came both as a surprise and it felt rather lacking in a sense. And by this point, I was planning on constructing all 3 monuments just to see them, as there were no indication that they changed gameplay elements within the flavor text. And I will note here that each of the buildings do have significant gameplay implications as they unlock some new features. So I continued my finally successful city until I've unlocked all of the tech tree points and built all 3 monuments. This is one of the few games where I've actually cared enough to look into what the achievements were, because reaching these personal goals made me think, well, what other goals can I create? To create new goals for myself which align with the achievements, this creates a necessity to understand game mechanics and systems a bit more thoroughly. While it may not be possible to complete all of the achievements in one playthrough, and it's likely not recommended to, particularly the achievements which will favor creating new maps or reach 500 population in the arid highlands, upgrade to town center tier 4 without producing or consuming meat, or upgrade to town center tier 4 while never building crop fields. Is it possible to survive solely from foraging without using these? I mean, probably, but it sounds insane. So you'll probably just want to start new maps to get these achievements. While it may be viable to play the game many different ways, such as the example above, being able to achieve goals like 100% happiness will be impossible without a mixture of all combined gameplay elements. This means that your town must be structured in a very precise way. It must have the required buildings, for example, pubs and theaters for entertainment in particular, and anything less than the intended perfect city will not suffice for this achievement. This is the most obvious downside to the game, in my opinion. While the the tooltip is very clearly worded for how entertainment works. For some reason, it's just not intuitive to me, or had it been realized by a large amount of the player base after reading some of the discussions on the topic. And why I say this is a downside, it's so the game guides you toward playing however you want, but when you realize exactly how these systems work, you'll realize that you can't approach your city building from a purely cosmetic approach. It has to function the ways that the programmers intended, and this sort of creates a disconnect between having an open-ended sandbox experience and a linear progression system. So these two methodologies of playing the game don't mesh with one another. Like, you won't naturally complete these achievements unless by some stroke of dumb luck, essentially. This game, it allows flexibility by letting the player relocate buildings, though, and at a very low cost. It's only the time investment that you have your villagers physically moving the things around. So while you're shoehorned into a direction for achievement completion, you're not locked into your choices if you made a decision halfway through your map that you'd like to start attempting to complete these achievements. I'm spending a lot of time talking about this because this is simply how my gameplay experience went. I was given the freedom and opportunity to play how I'd like to play, and this was kind of changing over time as I discovered more stuff about the game. This context is very important for talking about raiders in particular. Occasionally raiders will attempt to ruin your day and take all of your grains and all of your gold, and so my first attempt at playing this game, I decided to start it without raiders, like on the easiest difficulty, and purely experience this as a city building game. But I mean, so over the years I've kind of become more accustomed to having a relaxing experience rather than a stressful one. Like, I don't want to play video games to be stressed out. I want to play video games to relax. But to my surprise, I felt the game was kind of lacking an engagement to really keep me in that loop on the easier difficulty settings. Like, so the raiders were either like non-existent or rather trivial, which is great to have that customization if that's what you want. But for some reason, and to my surprise, the city building alone wasn't enough to keep me really engaged. And this is just purely my personal opinion. I'm sure a lot of people really enjoy just the city building by itself, but for some reason I felt it was necessary to play with the raiders. It just made the game flow a lot better. So yeah, this is purely my personal opinion, but I think the game is best played on the hardest available difficulty. And I believe they could even make an additional difficulty to make this more challenging. And there's a function in the game, it's like an artifact you can find called Ark of the Vengeful Dead, and that might be exactly what that's for, but I haven't tried that yet. Anyway, so the Vanquisher difficulty had just enough of a challenge for me from raid defense that it kept me building and repairing and reapproaching my design choices, which eventually turned into over 100 years in game of my settlement's development. I would highly recommend playing on Vanquisher difficulty after understanding how these basic functions work. The suggestion feels like something I wouldn't expect myself to say, but once you figure things out, just like jump into the next difficulty. So this will lead into Raider AI and pathfinding. In addition to controlling my own military units, it's perhaps one of the weakest parts of the game. The micromanagement feels necessary to have a greater chance of success, but it feels like it's one of the least fleshed out aspects of the game. I would often find soldiers colliding with one another or running into walls, being able to find their way around. They'll just kind of get stuck there if you don't do something about it. But what's interesting to me, though, is this is something I have a really hard time criticizing, because I've had some experiences where the battles are very engaging and everything seems to be working in the ways I'd expect it to. I think these mechanics deserve a little bit more attention and they can be fleshed out more, but for what it is, it's weird because it ties together the whole experience, and at the same time, like it could just be a little bit more polished, I suppose. But overall, it didn't bother me enough to stop playing at any point. So it's like a huge caveat that, like, while I didn't find there were enough options for controlling military units via like formations and selecting individual units for different tasks, which you can do, it's just the controls aren't quite 100% in my opinion. So like, despite this stuff, the game is clearly very polished, right? I just want to put in a side note here. I would love to see like patrol functions for your individual soldiers, so you don't have to micro them so much. Maybe like the ability to schedule guards like on rotating shifts for like the archer towers. Basically just some form of better control over where they need to be and when they need to be there. So beside that, it's just very polished. So from like the control perspective, the key bindings, the alert systems, all that stuff that's in place is already very good, to say the least. There's a few things I wouldn't mind seeing in the future. I might even go as far as to say like more intuitive UI functions. So like when you have your control 1 through 10 or whatever, that's pretty standard in RTS games. Maybe just having the option to have little icons for each of those groups you set up. But overall, there's a great amount of attention that went to making the user interface intuitive. And it's functional for what needs to be accomplished. And, you know, that's the type of thing I'd like to expect from multi-billion-dollar companies. And I'm looking at you, Civilization, but, you know, that's just not how it works. Yeah, so the UI in general is just lovely, I would say. So the map generation is certainly top-notch as well. There are just some beautifully designed scenes, particularly how the map sets up these like small mountains and lakes and little river type things. It's just beautiful. The buildings themselves are absolutely meticulously crafted. They're just absolutely gorgeous. When you zoom in to really look at the finer details of everything, it's just an incredible experience. There's only a few small things within this whole aspect that have annoyed me, and they're just relatively minor, really. Like occasionally snapping roads together can be a little bit tricky, or it might not come out exactly how you'd anticipate. I think this could be a cool thing to work on a little bit more, that I'm sure Yeah, they've probably gone through a lot of iterations of it, but like being able to add more or less curvature to a road would be cool, just to complement that snapping system. Overall, it's a very minor inconvenience, and more often than not is resolved in a way that is functionally fine for me. I think, so on this topic, probably my number one pain point in this entire video game is the flattening tool. There needs to be a better way to control flatness, maybe raise or lower terrain, or at the very least explain exactly what this tool does. The only way I could get the flattening tool to function how I'd expect is to have several flattening layers, like one over another. You can just keep placing them in the same place and your workers will continuously work in that spot. And that sounds something that would, like, it'd be realistic. Like, it'd be hard to flatten a huge piece of land, so you'd probably want to have them continuously working on a spot. I think just some sort of way to be able to anticipate what's going to happen, particularly, like, so I just don't understand if, like, they want you to flatten the side of a mountain. That's probably not something they want, but it's like you put these ores there that you need to build quarries on, and the quarries require flat spots to build on. So, like, if you have to place those on top of the nodes, like, you want to be able to make that flat in a way that's more intuitive, I suppose. Yeah, this to me personally was a bit frustrating at times, and I started looking at mods, and there are mods that try to address that. It's just something I haven't tried modding the game myself yet, so it's like that's, you'll see on the front page, that's one of the more popular mods. So, like, there are people that are having the same thoughts as me, I'm sure. So anyway, yeah, just the flattening tool. Like, what is it? Is it a flattening tool, or is it like a flattening with a question mark tool? Yeah, it just gave me flashbacks thinking about that. But anyway, beside that, everything works as I'd expect. The world's beautiful, and you can really, really tell that some people put a lot of effort into it. So, speaking of putting a lot of efforts into things, since I've written this much, I might as well give some information on this. I was primarily playing this on a gaming laptop through a second external display. I have an Asus TUF-F15 FX517ZR. That's with a 12th gen Intel Core i7. What is it? 12650 or something like that. 12650H. That's at 2.3 gigahertz, and my graphics card is the RTX 3070. It's the laptop version, 8 gigabytes of VRAM, 16 gigabytes DDR5, 4800 megahertz, and the external monitor I was using was an Acer Nitro 34-inch 180 hertz with FreeSync. That is the ED340CU S3. I was running this at 3440 by 1440. I believe I was running this at 60 hertz. So, that being said, using a laptop, the performance wasn't exactly buttery smooth, but out of the box, the game handled exceptionally well. So normally while using this laptop, I have to tinker with settings for several hours to get games to function how I'd anticipate. And this is just kind of the nature of gaming on shitty laptops. And so anyway, while it was under heavy load, occasionally the game would stutter, but it never crashed. I didn't have any technical difficulties during my experience playing, and again, that's the sort of thing you should expect from big companies releasing games, and here just a relatively small company is just blowing expectations out of the water. So I'll say I wasn't entirely at a stable 60 FPS, but honestly, if I had to mess with my graphics settings at all, if I spent more than just a few minutes like fine-tuning it, I'm pretty sure I could get it working pretty well. So like, I guess that's the most astonishing part to me. So I didn't even open the graphics settings until writing this. So for context, graphics settings are relatively limited, but probably has just about everything you'd need. There's the resolution, refresh rate, brightness, super sampling, anti-aliasing, shadows, particle effects. You can turn foliage on and off. I noticed I had a pretty good performance impact just turning off foliage, and I like barely even noticed the difference. So ambient occlusion and depth of field, which is default off, which is great because if there was depth of field, I would have went in there and turned it off. It would have made me open the settings menu. So this game has official Steam Workshop support, although it doesn't seem to have a lot of mods yet. I personally have not tried using any of these, but some notable mods include free-ranging foragers, resource relocation, which would be useful for, say, moving ores off the side of mountains if you wanted, and some terrain helpers if you just want to fix the terrain in a way that works better for you. So this inadvertently addresses pretty much my only frustrations with the game, is being able to edit these things. I would certainly love to see more involved modding for this game, but I have no idea how easy it is to interact with the system or to mod the game itself, so I just know that this could be like the perfect base for some awesome mods. Like, I'm thinking like some Warhammer mods would be sick here. So overall, I'm very happy with this company. Great, in particular, after investing my time into Grim Dawn and now having a little while into Farthest Frontier. I preface this by saying I purchased the game several years before it was released, during the early access launch, with the intention of only playing version 1.0, and I'm very happy with that decision. This game is really, truly a slow burn. It's not your typical city builder, and it's honestly, that wasn't what I expected, and I'm kind of happy about that. The amount of attention the developers give to their games is just astounding to me. Like, it's obvious that they play and love their own video games. So that being said, I'm looking forward to any further updates on Farthest Frontier, and I would even go as far as to say I would just immediately purchase any potential DLCs they have. That's about it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click all the things, do the stuff. Patreon.com/EUFH if you'd like to see more. Donations will encourage me to keep doing this type of thing. Or buymeacoffee.com/universe from here, where you can just pick a one-time amount if that's your thing. That stuff makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. So if you like it, please consider that. Thank you for your time.